Hello, I'm Janusz welcoming you to another edition of World Today here on TVP World. During World War II, about 100,000 Poles died in a tragic outbreak of violence, instigated by nationalist organizations in Ukraine, in the region known as Volhynia. Known as the Volhynia Massacre, the event has soured relations between Poland and Ukraine for decades. But with the onset of Russian aggression against Ukraine, the two countries, Poland and Ukraine, have sought to overcome their differences in a display of friendship and unity. This Sunday, the presidents of Ukraine and Poland sent a powerful message of reconciliation by paying homage to innocent victims of the massacre. But what else needs to be done to make sure old wounds can finally heal? And what role might Russia have played in fanning the flames of discontent? Joining us here tonight is Marcin Kaczorowski from the National Memorial Foundation. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
So when you saw this gesture of reconciliation, what were your first impressions?
Well, it's good that certain first steps are made towards reconciliation. It's good that both presidents were present there. I think that such gesture should be appreciated. However, this whole ceremony lacked one important element. It's a clear declaration of who the perpetrators were and who the victims were. We talked about the innocent victims of Volhynia Massacre. However, we have to bear in mind that Ukraine Institute of National Remembrance frequently speaks of Volhynia Massacre, which was a genocide committed on Polish people by Ukrainian chauvinists, as if it was a conflict, as if it was Polish-Ukrainian war. It wasn't much of a war. So it can be the words of Mr. Zelensky that we pay tribute to all the innocent victims of Volhynia Massacre can be easily, unfortunately, twisted, and the meaning could be changed.
Do you think this might have been the intention? Let us take a look, perhaps, at what President Zelensky had to say after the ceremony.
In the morning, I met with Mr. President of Poland, Duda, a conversation with him, a prayer service. There were representatives of all denominations and religious communities in the Lutz Church. Together with Andrzej, we honored the memory of all victims in Volyn. We value every life, remember history, and defend freedom together.
So do you think that this, perhaps, might have been intended simply as an all-encompassing statement, that they feel like the victims of the massacre need to be commemorated, that there was no intention of trying to, perhaps, impose any sort of more relative understanding of that,
I don't think
or trying to make it less transparent as to who was actually the victim and who the perpetrator was.
I don't think it was the intention of the Polish president, by no means, no.
It doesn't seem to have been the intention of the president of Ukraine either. I mean, this was a very general statement, such as often appears in the case of such ceremonies.
It's not easy
Wouldn't you
to
say that this was
criticize.
essentially something as an invitation to further talks in this regard? So on lower levels within the two governments, there will now be a better atmosphere to begin a conversation intended to essentially hammer out all the details, how to go about all the crucial things regarding the research that needs to be carried out, and also the way in which these victims need to be commemorated so that their memory is not lost.
I think this might be first kind of a probe to check the reaction of the Ukrainian society towards such statements. As we know, Stepan Bandera was the ideological father of Ukraine, organization of Ukrainian nationalists.
The people who committed the murders.
Yes, I mean, exactly. He is a very prominent figure in Ukrainian national memory, considered kind of a father of a nation.
Here lies the paradox that many people think of him as a national hero, and they just try not to see this darker side that he had, a man who essentially instigated the murder of thousands of innocents.
Exactly, and it's as we can see, the Poles and Ukrainians are getting closer. The war brought us closer together, and this is, I believe, the main issue dividing Poles and Ukrainians today. An issue that cannot be swept under the carpet. And it requires courage from the Ukrainian nation to, first of all, take a look at the families of the victims and the victims themselves, Polish women, children, elderly, pregnant women were targeted for genocide. According to ideology of Ukrainian nationalists, and particularly organization of Ukrainian nationalist B, ONB, the only possibility to create Ukrainian statehood was to eliminate all so-called invaders, meaning
So they thought, right?
Poles, Jews, Romanians, Hungarians,
This
Russians.
is an extreme ideology, and right
Exactly.
now the paradox is that people who were involved in these crimes are also a part of this sort of collective legacy. At least many Ukrainians believe that they form an important part of this national history. So now, how do you think we should go about trying to raise awareness of that? Because some people say that in some regions of Ukraine, and particularly those that were not affected by these events, there is not much of a memory of that. I mean, this was not something that was publicly spoken of during the Soviet era, for example.
Exactly. In the in Eastern Ukraine, they could be even anti-heroes. So it depends on the region of Ukraine.
So how to go about it without trying to send a message that, look, we're trying to fan the flames of sort of antagonism. Like, we're trying to... I mean, there is one country that would surely benefit from this being a bone of contention. Obviously, Russia is that country.
Of course.
But before we actually go to that particular aspect, how do you think we should approach this particular issue so as not to create a feeling that this is about some sort of enmity between two nations? No, it's not about two nations. It is about a specific group of people and a specific ideology, and it's about basically acknowledging that there were darker chapters in Ukraine's history. Any country has chapters which it might feel ashamed of.
Yeah.
It's about being able to own up to that, and facing these memories, facing these issues, and opening some sort of dialogue about that. Right?
Recognition of a genocide is the basic step forward, and we can see how genocide has poisoned relations between different nations till today. Best example: Turks and Armenians. Another example: the British and Afrikaans people, Chinese and Japanese. Those genocides have been swept under the carpet, and they haven't been dealt with properly, and we are at the risk that the same can happen again. I think for Polish families, and most of us are brought up in Christian tradition, being able to bury our dead and the bones of our dead at the moment, yes, and being able to put on the tombstones, here lie the Polish victims of Ukrainian insurgent army, for example. I think that will be the first major step forward. Without this, I don't think any reconciliation is possible, and I think we should send a clear message to our Ukrainian partners that we cannot go even 2 inches back from that. Where would we go? I think the recent statements of certain Ukrainian officials, namely that we should be taking better care of Ukrainian insurgent army's graves, are unacceptable. I think it's up to Polish government to respond.
So how do you think should we maintain a balance in this discussion? Because there is always a risk that there will be certain hardliners who have influence over the Ukrainian public opinion. And these few individuals who still maintain that people we're talking about, those who committed these crimes, for them, they are still heroes, and they will stick to that. Do you think that they might actually derail the entire effort, and we'll end up having, essentially, having the vast majority willing to go the extra mile for this reconciliation, reaching out, embracing the positive sides of being neighbors, being united by a common enemy, that is the Russian Federation, and essentially also sharing the centuries of history in this region. But on the other hand, we have this tiny minority that will still try to poison those relations. So how do we approach that? Do you think that at some point we might be willing to accept this is going to be a process? It's going to take a while before people realize that we can't simply say, look, your vision of history has been wrong, here is a new one. Because some people will be in a state of denial for quite a while before they try to perhaps reach out to the sources, investigate, and say, well, perhaps we might have been wrong. Perhaps those of whom we thought of as heroes, they have committed deeds so dark and so reprehensible that they no longer should be treated as such.
Genocide
So this is
denial
a gradual-
is a very complex issue. I think this is also that's a very good question, by the way, and also is unfortunately in the essence of the history of extreme Ukrainian nationalism. As we know, before the war, the Polish centrist military coup, Sanacja, tried to improve relations in Volhynia region, trying to even research Ukraine history better and support it, build institutions in which Poles and Ukrainians could work towards a common goal. Fortunately, that was exactly the point for the organization of Ukrainian nationalists. The better those relations were, the worse it was for them. They didn't want this reconciliation. And people who really believe in this ideology that you can only accept uncompromising solutions may pose such a risk if they really believe in the words of Bandera or other fathers of or UPA. I think the voice from other angles could help. This narrative, those messages are being sent from different countries.
Do you think the problem could also be that Ukrainians will continue to be hit by accusations from Russia, who will obviously be trying to generalize that? You know, every Ukrainian, in the view of the Russian propaganda, is a Banderite and is a nationalist, right? So they are trying to exploit this. They are doing all they can to tarnish Ukraine's image, and they are using those historical parallels. Obviously using this sort of false generalization, right? Because the vast majority of Ukrainians have nothing to do with this ideology. And naturally, this whole concept of denazifying Ukraine is a massive hoax. It's something that was created by the Russian propaganda to justify what they are doing now, the war crimes, the invasion.
Choosing the wrong heroes is a great pretext, ideological pretext for Russians to say they can create a certain narrative and address their own population, say, look, these are their heroes. And unfortunately, Poles cannot deny that Ukrainian insurgent army are responsible for crimes against humanity. The voices of support will definitely not be uttered by diplomats from Israel. As we know, Mr. Zelensky could deliver his speech at Yad Vashem. I think this might be one of the reasons. They cannot join certain narratives. As we know, Ukrainian policemen, who many of them later joined the Ukrainian insurgent army, have vastly contributed to Holocaust on Ukrainian soil. As we know, the concentration camp guards, SS units created under German auspices, of course, that helped in the German operations on Ukrainian soil. These are all facts, and I think Ukrainian National Institute of Remembrance should listen to the arguments of Polish historians. We are not delivering this evidence in ill will. We simply cannot change history, and we cannot alter this. We cannot use a magic wand and say, these are your heroes, we can accept them. We cannot.
There is essentially no malicious intent there. The underlying intent is to facilitate the further development of the friendship between Ukraine and Poland, which is something to be treasured.
This is the only thing that divides Poles and Ukraine.
Especially now that Russia has shown that it is actually a country that is trying to undermine the security structure, the entire framework within which Europe has been essentially existing for the last couple of decades. So there is a common enemy, there is a common cause. History must not stand in the way, but this requires openness.
And we come to the
reconciliation.
interesting conclusion here. So basically, I think if we were the Russian agents and Russian influencers, it would be in our best interest to maintain a cult of organizations which are unacceptable for the world community. I think
So essentially, we need to be careful about Russian narratives trying to undermine the process of reconciliation. Marcin Kaczorowski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm Nasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us for more latest news and updates.